Cast your mind back to the summer of 1994. Giant Stadium in New Jersey, a World Cup quarterfinal. Brazil against the Netherlands. 76,000 people packed into a venue that had been built for American football, creating an atmosphere so unlike anything the stadium had previously hosted that the noise was described by journalists who were there as something close to physical. You felt it in your chest. The Brazilian fans in yellow, the Dutch in orange, two sets of supporters who had traveled from the other side of the world to watch their teams on American soil. And around them, tens of thousands of American spectators who had come to discover what all the noise was about and left having found out. That tournament set the all-time World Cup attendance record, 3.5 million spectators, 52 matches, a record that no edition since has touched. Not France, not Germany, not South Africa, Brazil, Russia, or Qatar. The United States, in a tournament played in a country that at the time had no professional football league, no significant football broadcast culture, and no history of hosting the game at this level, somehow produced the best-attended World Cup in the history of the sport. That is the inheritance of 2026. That's the record FIFA pointed to when it brought the tournament back to North America. That's the standard against which everything being planned for June 11th to July 19th will be measured. And right now, with 12 days until the opening ceremony, there is a growing and documented concern that the 2026 World Cup is at risk of not living up to it. Not in terms of attendance numbers alone. 5 million tickets have been sold, and that figure may yet grow. But in terms of what matters most in a football stadium, the people in the seats, and whether they're the right people, and whether they fill those seats with the kind of noise and color and passion that makes a World Cup feel like the thing it's supposed to be. If you want to understand how football works and why stories like this one matter, subscribe now and stay with this channel, because the story we're about to tell has been building for over a year, and 12 days out, it still isn't fully resolved. Let's begin where the warning arrived first, not in the press, not in a FIFA report, in the stadiums themselves. Last summer, the FIFA Club World Cup was held across the United States. 32 clubs, a new format, venues across the same cities that will host the 2026 World Cup. It was, in FIFA's framing, the tournament's most significant domestic warm-up event. A chance to test the infrastructure, assess the appetite, and build excitement ahead of the main event. And then, the seats stayed empty. MetLife Stadium, the stadium that will host the World Cup final on July 19th, averaged 44.9% capacity across 5 first-round matches, less than half full, at a tournament featuring some of the most famous clubs in the world. FIFA slashed ticket prices to try to move inventory. Matches were rescheduled, promotions were launched, and still the seats in the upper tiers of those enormous NFL stadiums sat vacant, row after row, visible on every broadcast. The reason matters. The Club World Cup featured clubs, not national teams. And in the United States, where football culture exists primarily in immigrant and diaspora communities rather than in the mainstream, club allegiance to the specific teams involved was thin. There was no emotional, generational connection between an American crowd and, say, Flamengo or Al Hilal. The traveling support from Europe and Latin America was limited by cost and distance. The local audience wasn't yet football engaged enough to fill a 90,000-seat venue for a tournament it had only just been asked to care about. The World Cup is different. The World Cup connects to national identity in a way that club football never can. When the United States play, Americans turn up. When Mexico play at the Azteca, 87,000 people are already there before a ticket is sold. When Argentina play anywhere in the world, the Argentine diaspora finds a way to be in the building. But the Club World Cup left a warning that was hard to ignore, and travel and tour analysts who covered the event specifically said so. They said the empty seats at the Club World Cup raised serious questions about whether the 2026 World Cup would see the kind of atmosphere that fans hoped for,
particularly in venues where traveling international support was weaker and local football culture was less established. FIFA noted the lessons and pressed on. And now, 12 days out, the questions the Club World Cup raised are being answered, partially, unevenly, city by city, by the actual booking data.
Let's look at that data, because it's where the story becomes specific and where the concern becomes concrete. Sports Illustrated published an analysis in December of last year titled 2026 World Cup Ticket Prices Create Serious Risk of Unwanted Spectacle. The phrase was not theirs. It came from a report. The risk they were describing was this: that FIFA's decision to abandon its original commitment of $21 tickets, the price point used in the hosting bid, in favor of a dynamic pricing model that would push the cheapest final ticket to $4,185 and the most expensive face value seat in the stadium to nearly $11,000, would create a pricing structure that ordinary football fans simply could not afford to access. Not the secondary market, not the resellers, the official face value price, $11,000 for a seat at the World Cup final. The Journal, an Irish outlet, put Infantino's justification for this into plain language. He said the United States was the most developed entertainment market in the world and that market rates had to apply. The Journal noted that FIFA's own revenue projections had risen from an initial estimate of $1.8 billion in ticket revenue to $3 billion, a 67% increase, driven primarily by the dynamic pricing model that pushed prices to levels the original bid documentation never contemplated. For that additional revenue, FIFA received criticism from every direction. Football Supporters Europe called it a monumental betrayal. U.S. congressional representatives wrote formally to FIFA asking it to lower prices. The AHLA's survey of hotel operators found that ticket costs were the primary reason international visitors cited for not attending. The EU reporter, covering the story in May, noted that the ticket rollout had been overshadowed by consistent and sustained criticism of the pricing strategy, even as FIFA pointed to 5 million sold tickets as evidence of strong demand. Here's the distinction that matters. Selling 5 million tickets is not the same as having 5 million passionate football fans in those seats. FIFA's own data showed that most of the ticket buyers were based in the 3 host nations across North America. That tells you something important about who is in those stadiums. Not the Argentine fan who flew in from Buenos Aires, not the Moroccan supporter who saved for 3 years for this moment. The domestic American audience, people who live within driving distance, attending because the World Cup is happening nearby and it feels like an event worth experiencing, rather than because their national team's participation is a matter of deep personal investment. That domestic crowd is not nothing. America has 30 years of football culture that didn't exist in 1994. MLS has created genuine local fan bases in cities like Seattle, Los Angeles, Atlanta, and Kansas City. The Hispanic communities of Houston, Miami, and Los Angeles carry football in their bones. The domestic audience for this World Cup is more football literate than any previous generation of American spectators. But there's a specific kind of energy that makes a World Cup feel like a World Cup. It comes from the traveling supporters. The fan who is 3,000 miles from home, wearing colors that nobody around them recognizes, singing songs in a language the local stewards don't speak, outnumbered in the stands, but absolutely certain that the game belongs to them as much to anyone else. That energy, concentrated, passionate, globally diverse, is what fills the upper tiers of stadiums with noise rather than with empty seats. And that's the energy the data suggests is arriving in lower volumes than projected. European airline bookings to the United States for the tournament period are 14% below the same period last year. Hotel occupancy across most American host cities is running below forecast. In Kansas City, between 85% and 90% of hotels are below expectations. In Boston, Philadelphia, San Francisco, and Seattle, hotel operators are describing the World Cup as a non-event.
The AHLA's formal May 4th report found that 80% of 205 surveyed hotel operators across all 11 host cities were tracking below initial forecasts. What drove that gap? The AHLA named the causes directly: high ticket prices, visa barriers that have blocked fans from 39 countries, including nationals from 4 competing nations, geopolitical concerns that have made international travelers hesitant, and FIFA's own room block cancellations, which returned thousands of hotel reservations to market all at once, creating what the AHLA called an artificial early demand signal that collapsed on recalibration.
That last cause deserves a moment. FIFA, as standard operating procedure, books large blocks of hotel rooms in advance for officials, media, federation staff, and sponsors. As the event approaches, unused blocks are released back to the open market. Hotels plan their investments, renovations, staffing, World Cup activations based on those early bookings. When the releases arrive in large volumes, the assumed demand disappears, and the recalibration is painful. Philadelphia alone saw FIFA cancel 2,000 hotel room reservations at short notice. Operators described being left in a very uncomfortable situation. FIFA said the releases were contractually consistent and in many cases delivered ahead of schedule. Both things can be true. The problem still happened. The secondary ticket market reflects all of this. Average resale prices for group stage matches fell 23% between mid-April and mid-May. 87 of 91 US and Canadian matches saw their entry price drop. The sellers had set prices assuming demand that hadn't materialized, and the market corrected itself week by week toward the level where real fans and real money actually met. Now, let's bring in history, because the World Cup has been in difficult territory before, and how it navigated those situations tells you something about what might happen in the next 12 days and beyond. The 1990 World Cup in Italy is the comparison that comes up most often in this kind of analysis. Beforehand, the tournament was widely described as poorly organized, logistically complicated, and unlikely to produce the football that the occasion demanded. 8 of the 52 matches played to crowds of fewer than 30,000. The format was criticized. The football in the group stage was defensive to a fault. And yet, 8 matches in, the tournament produced Roger Milla dancing at the corner flag, Paul Gascoigne's tears, Schillaci running through defenses in the Italian night, a semifinal between West Germany and England that an entire generation of football supporters has never forgotten, and a final that was flawed and difficult and still somehow felt like the right conclusion to a tournament that had found its soul somewhere in the middle of its own problems. Football does that. It finds its soul. It produces the moment that overrides every reservation you brought into the stadium with you. The question for 2026 is whether the empty seats, if they come, will be visible enough, persistent enough, in the right matches to become the story that follows the tournament. Because there is a specific nightmare scenario in football broadcasting. It's not a bad match or a dull final. It's the camera cutting away from the action and showing the upper tier of an 80,000-seat NFL stadium, row after row of empty plastic, while the game is still being played below. That image, broadcast to the 189 countries watching this tournament, says something about the event that no press release can correct. FIFA knows this. The organization has been working the problem. The latest ticket sales phase opened across 104 matches in a first-come, first-served model, with prices in categories 1 through 3 still available as of this week. FIFA confirmed that additional batches may be released periodically until the final. The implication is that FIFA is managing inventory actively, trying to ensure that any matches tracking below full capacity are addressed before the cameras arrive. The fan festival infrastructure is part of the answer. Free public viewing events across all 16 host cities, Mexico City's Zocalo holding 80,000 people at a time, Toronto's waterfront, Vancouver's harbor, the fan zones across every American venue will be full, always are. The World Cup has always existed on 2 levels, inside the stadium and outside it. And the outside the stadium experience, for fans who couldn't get tickets or couldn't afford them, has often been more alive than anything happening in the corporate hospitality suites above it. Mexico's three host cities are an important counterweight to the broader concern. Guadalajara, Mexico City, and Monterrey are football cities in a way that Kansas City and Philadelphia simply are not. The Azteca on opening night will be full. The Akron Stadium for Uruguay against Spain will be full. The BBVA Stadium in Monterrey will be full. Those matches will generate the television images of color and noise that a World Cup is supposed to produce, and they will share broadcast time with the matches in American venues, creating a picture of the tournament that is, across its full span, more atmospheric than the hotel data alone would suggest. Toronto and Vancouver add their own dimension. Canada's multicultural cities, where nearly every competing nation has a diaspora community close to the stadium, will fill their venues with something that more homogeneous sporting cultures simply can't replicate. When Bosnia and Herzegovina play Canada in Toronto on June 12th, in the first ever men's World Cup match on Canadian soil, the Bosnian community in that city will make their presence felt in a way that the attendance numbers won't fully capture. So, where does this leave us? The empty seat threat is real. The data is not invented. The Club World Cup was a warning that went partly heeded. The pricing structure created a genuine risk that Sports Illustrated named in December and the hotel industry confirmed in May. The international fan travel numbers are below projection across most American markets. And yet, the football is 12 days away. And the football, when it arrives, tends to answer questions that data couldn't. I'd genuinely like to know, where do you land on this? If you've been following this tournament closely, if you've seen the booking numbers and the resale drops and the hotel surveys, does it worry you? Does the possibility of visible empty seats in certain matches affect how excited you are for what's about to start? Or do you think the football will override it, the way it overrode the concerns in 1990 and 2002 and every other tournament that arrived with problems attached? Subscribe if you haven't already. We're covering every match, every development, every story from June 11th to July 19th. This channel exists for exactly this kind of conversation, the football and everything surrounding it, told honestly. Leave your answer below, because I think the people who've been watching this game long enough to remember the 1994 World Cup and what it felt like to see those stadiums full have a particular perspective on what's at stake here. If this kind of analysis is worth your time, a like helps more than you might think. Subscribe and don't miss what's coming, because 12 days from now, the biggest football tournament in history begins, and whatever happens in those stadiums, we'll be here to tell you what it means. 12 days. The seats are there. The question is who fills them. Football at this scale is never just a tournament. It's a moment in time, and 2026 is going to be one of them.